Hello and welcome to another edition of The Flour Man.
Flour man, you're not ready for Flour Man. Flour Man makes good things with flour. Flour Man, you're not ready for Flour Man. I love his food. Please give me some more.
Right, today I'm going to make for you a tasty, egg-free, totally vegan flan. Now let me talk you through the ingredients. Obviously we have our flour. I am the flour man. The flour is going to be our main ingredient obviously in our pastry, the base for our flan. They have some spring onions, some normal onions, about 9 large mushrooms which we're going to chop up later on. We've got about 2 cups of fine breadcrumbs. I made the bread myself. Then we have some mixed herbs, some yeast flakes, very nutritional and also nice flavour, some bouillon, some vegetable stock cubes, a little bit of oil again for the pastry, a little bit of margarine, garlic, salt and some kale. So in essence it's a kale, mushroom and onion flan. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to clear away some of the ingredients, I'm going to chop up the mushrooms and then I'm going to combine the filling first before we do the pastry. Okay, first up we're going to combine our ingredients and we're going to start with the onions. I'm going to put a little bit of oil in here. Okay, I'm going to start to combine our dry ingredients right now. So I put a little bit of oil in. I'm going to start with the onions. And I'm cooking on a hot plate today because one, it's very controllable, and two, it allows me to use it on this table here as opposed to over by the stove, so we have a little bit more space. So first up, onions go in. Nothing quite like the aroma given off by frying onions. Into that I'm going to add very shortly some of our spring onions. But before I do that, because they cook at a very different rate, I'm just going to allow these onions to just cook down a little bit. Okay, the onions have been cooking down now for just a couple of minutes. Next I'm going to add some spring onions. Now these are the savoury elements to the dish, so you can add more or less according to your own personal preference. Again, the flexibility of this particular recipe is that if there are other vegetables that you prefer more, you can add those too. Like you can have some red peppers, that works very well. The mushroom I'm going to suggest is quite an important ingredient to keep. One, it gives quite a distinct flavour, but also it seems to bind very well, which bodes well when we're making a flan. We want something that's fairly solid at the end, not just that's going to come apart once it gets cut. Okay, the next thing I'm going to add in my chopped mushrooms. Now, I personally like mushrooms chopped quite coarsely, but my wife, she likes them quite fine, so naturally I've chopped these quite fine, otherwise she's may not eat it. If you're not a mushroom lover, then the beautiful thing about this particular dish is because of the way the mushrooms cook down, they don't have an overly powerful flavour, but they just help to make a really nice consistency. So the onions are cooked down enough. I'm just going to add in the mushroom now. And I'm going to mix this all together. The mushroom is going to cook down quite a bit. Might want to add just a little bit more oil The next thing I'm going to add, I'm going to start adding some of the flavourings. So I've got some garlic powder. I'm going to add some of that. I've got some bouillon. A very, very, very good all-round flavouring, to be honest with you. It's almost like the perfect cook's cheat to add into food. Anything you want, pour a bit of that in, it's going to taste amazing. Next I'm going to add a little bit of nutritional yeast, similar kind of thing, adds to the flavour, and also very, very high in protein. Very, very high in protein, so if you're a bodybuilder looking for a very nutritional but still relatively healthy flan dish as an alternative to eggs, this is the way to go. Next I'm going to add in the other main ingredient, which is some kale. Now once I put the kale in, I'm going to have to cover it so the kale can cook down a little bit. And before I cover it to cook, the only thing I'm going to add to this now is in here I have 3 dissolved vegetable stock cubes. I've used no on this occasion. So I'm going to put that in, that's going to help the kale to cook down. Then the final ingredient I'm going to add, well, more or less, is the breadcrumbs. That helps bind it all together again. Now I'm going to leave this to cook down for about 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, our kale's been cooking down now for about 10 minutes, and to be honest with you, it's quite a stubborn vegetable, so you really do need to cook it down for quite a while. And I added a little bit more water to it, so what we ended up here with something that looks almost like a soup or a stew, which is fine, because the next thing we're going to add, which is our final ingredient, is the breadcrumbs, and that's going to thicken it right up very quickly. So I'm going to add, I'm not going to measure it out, well I will sort of, I'm going to add about a cup of breadcrumbs at first, stir it in, because the breadcrumbs are going to absorb a lot of the liquid, and I'm looking for something that ends up with quite a stiff consistency. Into this mix as well, I'm going to add a spoonful of margarine, and that little bit of fat will help it solidify when it cools down. That part's optional, you don't have to add the margarine, but I found that works quite well. Just going to stir that in, turn the heat up a little bit. Cooking on a hot plate is so controllable. A few years ago we heard something about the dangers of using a microwave, for example, and since then we got rid of the microwave and just started using a hot plate, and to be honest with you, even though I'm cooking in it now, you can reheat food in, you know, a little longer than a microwave, and it does it perfectly well. And it's been years now since I used a microwave, and you don't miss it. These hot plates are very, very, very good indeed. It was my mother that first bought a hot plate for, actually my mum bought this one. I'm going to put about another cupful of breadcrumbs. I think in total I'm going to end up adding about 3 cups of breadcrumbs, and that's really going to help bind it all together, particularly when it cools down. You can see it's starting to soak up all the liquid, which is just what we want. It's important as well that you taste as you're going along, because if the mixture here doesn't actually taste nice, the end result won't taste nice either. You need to have the right flavour blend here before you start to bake it. Okay, and with each cup you can see it's starting to get very stiff, which is just fine. Now after I finish mixing in this, I'm going to leave it somewhere to stand for a while, and then that will thicken further and end up with an extremely stiff consistency, which is fine because that's what we want. If it's too wet even after it's stood, then once it's baked it will still be quite a sloppy consistency. We want something that's fairly solid for our flan. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the remainder of these breadcrumbs, which in total will make about 3.5 cups of breadcrumbs. And that translates to, roughly speaking, about 4 or 5 slices of wholemeal bread, because that's what these breadcrumbs have actually come from. It's actually best as well if you use bread where it's not quite stale but a few days old. That makes, for these purposes, better breadcrumbs. You don't want it fresh bread straight out of the oven. You want bread that's a little bit hard. Okay, that's the consistency we have. I've checked, have the flavour we want. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to cover it. No, I'm not going to cover it. I'm going to leave it somewhere to stand, allow some of the heat to go out of it and allow the breadcrumbs to fully absorb all the liquid. And what I'm going to do next is make the pastry for our flan. Okay, now we come to the flour element of our dish. Now I'm going to make a pastry, and I'm going to use vegetable oil and the wholemeal flour. I'm going to use about 3 cups of wholemeal flour with just under 1.5 cups of oil and just a little bit of water just to try and bind it together a little bit. But I want it to be quite a short pastry, fairly crumbly in a sense. So first up the flour. One, 2, 3. Next, I'm going to use about 1.5 cups of oil, maybe a little bit less. And stir. Okay, I've added the flour and the oil. What I'm going to do is mix it together. The only thing I'm going to add to that, which I almost forgot, was a touch of salt. So I'm going to add a pinch of salt and a little tiny bit of sugar. Nothing enough to sweeten. And here we go. We mix. Now most pastries half fat to flour, but I'm just going to add just a touch more flour, maybe 1/2 cup. What I'm going to do is going to mix this all together until it forms a dough. I have added the ingredients together. I've changed the ratio a little bit. I'm going to go with 1/3 oil to 2/3 flour, roughly speaking, and that should do it. So I add a little bit more flour. All I'm going to do now, just work it together a little bit. Now, it's a very short mixture, as you can see, very crumbly, which is fine for the particular dish that I want. And if I was doing pastry that required rolling out, then you need to add a little bit of water to it, otherwise when you're rolling it out it just break apart. But as you can see, when we're going to use this particular pastry, we're not going to need to roll it out. And something this short, or this with this high in fat in relation to the amount of water, won't roll out very easily. But here, as you can see, we have quite a nice dough. Not that far off the consistency or of a biscuit really. A little bit of sugar and a few different ingredients, we can easily turn this into a biscuit, but that's not what we're aiming for today. Now again, if you use margarine instead of oil, you may use a little bit more because margarine has a lower fat content. But for oil wise, with it being 100% fat, about 1 cup of oil to about 2 cups of flour. Right, next we're going to line our flan dish with the pastry. What I'm going to do is lightly oil this and then transfer one to the other. Okay, we've oiled our dish. Next we have our pastry. What I'm going to do is put it in and literally we just press it around the dish. Okay, as you can see now we've fully lined our flan dish. Beautifully done. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to pop this in the oven just for about 5 minutes, just to kind of make sure the base gets fully cooked. And after about 5 minutes I'll take it out and then I will fill the contents with our filling that's been cooling next door. Okay, our pastry's back out of the oven. I just put it in there just long enough to sort of dry it out slightly, but not enough to bake it. Next I'm just going to fill it with our mixture, which has been sitting now for about half an hour. Now again, I've tasted this and you know, it tastes delicious. But remember, it's not gonna, if it doesn't taste nice going in, it's probably not gonna taste an awful lot better coming out the other side. So you need to make sure the flavours are right. Right, I've filled it now. Just put it in, pressed it down. Made it look quite neat. Now the next thing really, this needs to go into the oven for about half an hour. The mixture is quite dry, so it doesn't require an awful lot of cooking. And the ingredients themselves are actually cooked already. So this is just really just the final stage really of helping all the ingredients meld together. But there we have it. I'm going to pop this in the oven for about half an hour, check it on the way. I want to make sure these don't go too brown. I'm going to put it on about 150, 160 the oven, and then when it comes out we'll have a look. Okay, while our flan's in the oven, I'm going to have a little bit of a bonus feature because I have some of our filling left over. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to rework it slightly, a little bit of oil, a tiny bit. I'm going to put a little bit of flour, not much, and a little bit of baking powder to give a little bit of lightness. About half a teaspoonful. And then I'm going to rework this to make myself a spring onion, mushroom and kale loaf. Just put the ingredients in. Just going to stir them up. And this is quite a dense mixture, so I'm going to add just a touch more baking powder, just to give it a chance of being fairly light. It's not going to be light like a loaf of bread, but fairly light. Not only quite as dense as a meatloaf, but so I'm just going to mix this all up together. So we've still got quite a rich flavour from our filling from before. Just mix it around, a little bit more flour, a little bit of oil, and then it's almost a doughy consistency now. I'm just going to mix it around, and then transfer the contents to sort of my rectangular dish. And I packed it in quite tight. Now the idea is really that when it's baked I'll be able to turn it over and have something relatively solid, not quite as not quite as dense as what you would expect a meatloaf or even a nut loaf, but something that's dense enough for me to be able to slice off. So there we have it. So all done really to our original ingredients. Just add a little bit more flour, a touch of oil, a little bit of baking powder, and packed into a different shape. And in essence we get 2 dishes out of 1. To be honest with you, using the same mixture you could also form it to make burgers or a whole number of different things. As long as the flavour's there, the shape doesn't really make an awful lot of difference. So I'm going to pop this in the oven as well, so we get 2 for the price of 1.
Hello, I'm Flour Boy.
And we're back, and our flan is out of the oven. Oh, I'll just tip it forward so you can have a look. The pastry is very short, nice and crumbly. Okay, and we're just going to have a very simple meal. We're going to have our flan with a nice bowl of salad. And here we are, where the flan is out of the oven, still piping hot. It's set really well. Here we go, our super tasty kale, onion and mushroom flan. That's totally egg free. So, I'm the Flour Man, and today I'm joined by my trusty sidekick, Flour Boy. And thanks for watching.
Flour Man.
See you next time.
You're not ready for Flour Man. Flour Man makes good things with flour. Flour Man, you're not ready for Flour Man. I love his food. Please give me some more.
This is our bonus onion, mushroom and kale loaf. As you can see, it's risen a little bit. Still got some pliability into it. And that's pretty much using the same ingredients as a filling for our flan, but with a little extra flour and 1 or 2 other ingredients. So, today we managed to get 2 different dishes for the price of 1.
Flour Man, you're not ready for Flour Man. I love his food. Please give me some more.